Let's return to our top story today, the decision by traditionalist leaders within the Anglican Communion to reject the covenant that was designed to hold the communion together after years of debate about the ordination of gay bishops and the licensing of liturgies recognising same-sex partnerships. The conservative GAFCON movement say the covenant is fatally flawed, and their leaders have pledged to stay away from the next primates meeting, which is one of the Communion's instruments of unity. So does that now mark the end of the road for the Anglican Communion? Bishop Martin Minns is from the Anglican Church in North America and sits on the Secretariat of GAFCON's Primates Council. I asked him what GAFCON leaders regard as the fatal flaw in the Anglican Covenant, and apologies in advance for the quality of this phone line.
The fundamental thing, I think, is that trust has gone. The decisions and documents that have been worked on in the past have not been honoured. I think there's simply a lack of trust in the process. I think also the introduction of the whole role of the Standing Committee in terms of how the covenant is actually exercised has also caused great consternation. But I think, in fact, I got a direct quote from one of the primates who said, look, why do we keep going? All of the decisions we've made, the documents we've signed have never been honoured. There's no point.
Is your sense that this is not punitive enough?
I think it's punitive. I think it's simply that it's been watered down in terms of content, and the process is shifted from the primates themselves to this Standing Committee, which is still not clear exactly what it is. So it's not a matter of punitive. It's simply, I think, that there's a breakdown of trust from the earlier conversations.
Bishop, why did the primates of GAFCON decide to release their statement rejecting this covenant just as the General Synod was debating it?
The decision was frankly simply providential. There was no attempt to time it. What we've tried to work hard is to make sure that with documents of this sort, that everyone whose name is listed has had time to reflect, to take advice, and to agree to the wording. And every time that happens, it's complicated and long. It just so happened it was done on the day. There was no planning and coordinating that at all.
There are critics who will say that this was a tactical and possibly even manipulative approach by GAFCON. What's your response to that allegation?
Simply not true. The attempt to get everyone on board at a precise moment is simply not possible. Finally, everyone had read through, thought through, prayed through, and were ready to release it. I think most of them had no clue the Synod was even meeting.
Archbishop Rowan Williams has clearly worked very hard to get this covenant through the Synod. Isn't this a slap in the face for him?
I don't believe there's anything personal in this at all. I think there's a lot of affection for Archbishop Rowan. Frankly, the process has been going for many, many years. I think the lack of trust and the lack of willingness to listen to those from the Global South is really what's behind this.
Well, what would it take to persuade you to tarry longer with this process and to engage further with it?
I think it would be to honour the decisions and documents that have taken place in the past. I think that trust has to be rebuilt.
The Anglican Communion is now faced with what looks like a two-tier communion. Would you accept that?
I wouldn't say it's two-tier. I think the structure is shifting, and I think moving, frankly, from a fairly colonial structure into a much more of a global structure, and I think it will be far more of a network than a hierarchical structure.
Some liberals, of course, have their own reasons for not welcoming this covenant. Liberals, conservatives, traditionalists struggling with the covenant. Does this now signal the end game for the Anglican Communion?
Well, by no means. I think the Anglican Communion has got a huge contribution to give to the world. I think in many parts of the world it is thriving and growing and doing some remarkable things. I think it's simply the way in which it operates together has to change. I mean, I think in a sense it's a testament to its effectiveness. It's grown so much globally that the sheer weight of it and the vision and the passion for the communion is no longer in England. I believe that the Anglican community is incredibly healthy and doing some remarkable things. Structurally, the institutional structure has simply not kept up with its life. And I think that's what needs to change. And as you know, institutional change is always very hard. Those with the power are always reluctant to give it up.
Was it GAFCON's intention all along to reject this covenant?
Not at all. GAFCON folk actually were instrumental in the very beginning in actually the first draft. Archbishop Drexel Gomez and a number of the Global South folks actually were involved in producing the very first draft.
At what point did GAFCON leaders and primates know that this covenant was unacceptable?
I don't believe there's a single point. I think it's been an unfolding realization.
What of those primates who are part of GAFCON? Is it now the case that they will en masse refuse to attend the next primates meeting of the Anglican Communion?
I believe that that's what the statement says. And I think it's not just those primates, but I believe there's also a number of other primates in the Global South who have communicated similarly to the Lambeth Palace.
Bishop Martin Minns, and listening to that is a supporter of the Covenant, Dr. Graham Kings, the Bishop of Sherborne in the Diocese of Salisbury. Good morning to you, Bishop.
Good morning, William.
How significant will this week prove to be in the history of the Anglican Communion?
I think it is very significant because the General Synod gave an overwhelming vote of support to the Covenant. It was attacked from the left and it was attacked from the right. But following the lead of a strong presidential address from the Archbishop, it was an overwhelming support. So rather than being fatally flawed, it was giving a life-giving boost.
Are you at all sympathetic to the GAFCON primates who plainly believe that other member churches of the Communion cannot be trusted to honour any covenant?
No, I'm not. I'm sympathetic to the leadership of the Global South Anglican movement, which is different from GAFCON. GAFCON is a subset of that. And the chair of the Global South Anglican movement is John Chu, the Bishop of Singapore, Archbishop of Southeast Asia. And John emailed me and said the Singapore Diocese have passed the covenant. He was involved in the commission that brought it together. And similarly, Munir Anis, Bishop in Egypt and presiding bishop of the Middle East, is still in favour of the covenant. There are still some questions. And Ian Ernest, who is the chair of CAPA, the Council of Anglican Provinces in Africa. These three moderate Global South Anglican leaders are still in favour of the covenant. And so it's just not a case that the whole of the Global South. GAFCON is not the whole of the Global South Anglican movement.
And it's fair to say that even without GAFCON's rejection, this wasn't a universally popular covenant, was it?
No, as I say, it was attacked from people on the left. There were adverts in the church press. There was some misinformation in that was corrected. And it was attacked also from the right. But it was an overwhelming vote. And that was utterly extraordinary.
What did you make of Martin Minns' comment that this is not the end game for the Communion, but a revolution in how the Communion organises itself and its conversations?
Well, first of all, Martin's although he's part of the Anglican Church in North America, that is not the Episcopal Church in America. There is a long-standing church there, the Episcopal Church in the USA. ANCA, the Anglican Church in North America, is a split-off. Martin and Robert Duncan, they've formed their own church. They've just invented their own church. Now, I'm sympathetic to their views. I'm conservative on sexuality myself, but not the way they see the church. And I don't want the church and the communion to be split. They've split off in the States, and I don't want that to become a model. I was worried when Martin spoke about reducing the communion to a network. I mean, networks are very different from an organic communion.
Nevertheless, you can't force people to keep talking and discussing issues when they basically don't want to. Isn't it time to face facts and recognise that those who don't want to be part of it are already leaving?
I think the key thing about the Anglican Communion Covenant is that it is an opt-in covenant. And so nobody's forcing people to join it. If you join it, then you're part of the Anglican Communion. You're fully involved in the representative bodies. If you decide not to opt in, then you're still part of the Anglican Communion, but you're not in the centre in terms of representation. So there's no force in this, and it's up to the choices of provinces. The interesting thing about the GAFCON Primates Council is they can't decide for their provinces. It has to go to their provinces, and it hasn't gone yet. This is just a recommendation from some key leaders, certainly in Africa. I was in Kenya for 7 years and loved it. I was there again in 2007 and talked to key leaders. And I was in Sudan last year at the Standing Committee of the Provincial Synod. And Archbishop Daniel Deng is an extraordinary archbishop. That Standing Committee passed the covenant as it then was, and there's going to be a Provincial Synod next November, and I'd be surprised if they don't pass. Now, Daniel Deng himself is on the GAFCON Primates Council, so one of them has actually passed it. He couldn't be at the Oxford meeting, so that's why he was never mentioned in that statement.
Very briefly, Bishop, is there a plan B?
No, the covenant is the only way forward, and it is an extraordinary middle way. Where there is a will, there is a way.
Bishop Graham Kings, many thanks to you. And that's it for this week's edition of Sunday. Do join me again next week. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Sunday.